Hi, everybody. Hey, let's see. We're at chapter 9, pipes, filters, and redirection. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So, when we talk about these three commands, pipes, filters, and redirections and stuff, it really gets into the question of when we look at a file and we look at its contents of the file and stuff, we can actually do some basic maneuvering when it comes to the contents of the file, okay? Without actually opening a file, we can actually look at its content. Remember the type command from an earlier chapter, TYPE? So if I do a directory real quick, let's see, come back here, there we go, dir. This is my student data folder again, and I see that I have a file called, here we go, personal.fil, personal.fil, right? And you remember way back when we had that type command, type personal.fil. Right? And it says, oh, look, it's a list of names and looks like addresses and job titles or something like that. Okay, cool. All right. So that's just a file that maybe this was a list of people who are on an airplane, okay, or people who are passengers on a train or something like that, or students in a class or whatever. It's just something you created in a text file only, real quick and easy. One of the nice things about doing things in a pure text file environment is it doesn't require the receiver, if you send this to somebody, to have a sophisticated program to open it and use it, okay? Now, let's say that I want to take this file and I want to sort it, okay? Well, right now it looks like Scalay, Pan, 689. I can't tell any kind of sorts in here, okay? So if I want to just do a sort, what happens if I just do a sort? Well, hold on, slash question mark. Sort's got some switches, okay? I can sort based upon a particular column, indicates whatever a comparison begin at the end of the third character of a line or something like that. Okay, I can do it as a temporary, whatever, but all right, let's just try it. Sort personal.fil. Okay, now, look, now I didn't do anything other than using the sort command, right? I said sort and the name of the file. Now I'm gonna retype that command history with the personnel and compare the two. Down below here is what the original file still looks like. But when I ran the sort command, it renamed the sort. See, Galay is now up here in Galay, Carolyn, right? Orange Grove or Orange, right? Okay, so it's only temporarily sorted on the first character, okay? The file, as I typed it again, is still in its original location. If I want to save that sorted version of the file, I can redirect that file back to the original file name if I really wanted to, or to another file name. So for instance, let's do this. Let me clear the screen, okay, and say sort personal.fil, and then I'm going to use a right arrow, that means redirect, to, let's say, personal sort .txt. Okay, now I can type the contents of personal sort.txt, and I have, I combined them all into, sorry, kind of my bad, whatever. I put personal fill, not personal, sorry. Let me come back here. Got it. There we go. So now I'm sorry, that was just because there is a file called personal versus, or person versus personal. Okay, so now I can see this new file, personal sort.txt, is alphabetical, right, by the first character of the first line, okay? What was my original file? Type, right, type personal.fil, and see that it's still in its original state. So I now have two files. I have the original and I have a copy of the original that's sorted by the first character, okay? So sort's a pretty simple thing. I mean, I could use it just to sort, some numbers. I could say sort, press enter, 4, enter, 3, enter, 6, enter, 1, enter, 78, enter, whatever, and then hit function 6 or control Z, press enter, and it now sorted that in numerical order. As you can kind of see down here, right? It's now in order, okay? I could sort words and stuff as well, but that means I just got to type it out. Most of us are not going to use the sort command like I just showed you here. Most of us are going to have a text file that we created, and then we want to sort it. And it could be a file that we created from here, or let's say that I was in, a database, and I downloaded this into a spreadsheet, or I downloaded it into a text file, okay? From a spreadsheet into a text file. Then I can manipulate it there. Why? Because in the future, I won't need to have the spreadsheet file or the database software program to go in and play with that file, look around. Why do we sort things? Makes it easiest for her to find stuff, okay? Remember, there was a switch option in there, slash plus particular column. So if I said, hey, you know, I want to sort it based upon the title, and I say, I don't know, I can count these out, whatever. If this title is on, you know, the 42nd character, I could sort based upon this column. If I want to port on the state, maybe it's on the 38th character or the city or something like that. In other words, I can pick locations within that text file based upon its column location and then say sort everything off of that key field, that key line, okay, or key character, okay. I can also use what's called a find. So let me clear the screen again, okay. I'm going to type my, I'll use my history, right? Type my original file, okay, there's my original file. And I want to say is, hey, is there a file, is Jerry in this database? Well, I don't know. So I can say find Jerry space personal.fil. Now, if you look right up here, I do have somebody called Jerry Jones. Oh, didn't find any kind of Jerry in the personal file. Hold on, Jerry. Oh, let's see. I probably, if I'm searching for a keyword, I should probably put quotes around it. Whoops. So I said I'm searching for Jerry in the personal file. And it says, I didn't find anything. So number one is I recognize that if I'm going to search for a keyword, I got to put it in quotes. And then I didn't find it. Oh, that's because this is all lowercase. When you use the find command, it's case sensitive. So let's try that again. Let's come up here. I'm going to edit this. I use the history. I'll come to that here. And then I'll put in Jerry, all capital letters. And sure enough, there it is, Jerry Jones, okay? So I can find files and folders, okay, by using the find, I'm sorry, I can find, not files folder, I can find content inside of a text file by using the find command. Keep in mind, we've got to remember, it's case sensitive, okay? And again, if it comes back with nothing, it could either mean the file's not there or that those characters are not representative, or possibly you made a typo. Okay, because typos doesn't help you any, okay? It just says, hey, it's there, but it's in another form because you made a typo. You have to fix that, okay? Because it's going to be an exact match, okay? So again, we're using the find command in that process, okay? So sort a file, sort, right? Find contents in the file, and your book's going to go through several versions of that. It goes on page after page and stuff in the chapter. And then finding things like more. Oh, by the way, the arrow. Remember I used that arrow to redirect the file? Way back up here. It was here, this one here, right? Remember I said, hey, redirect it and make this new file here. That was a right arrow, one single, which means output to a new file. If I used a double arrow, right arrow, and then did that, it would be append, meaning that I could add files together by appending to an existing file. Rather than if I just use one, it'll say you want to overwrite it because, it would either ask you to overwrite if you prompt it or just overwrite it, in which case whatever was there before would be removed. So if I redirect it back to the original file name, I would then change the original file from the way it was entered to the new sorted version, and I'll never have the way it was originally entered. Why does that matter? Well, a lot of times we do things on a first come, first served basis. You know, as a student, you enroll in a class, sometimes you end up on a wait list. Well, wait lists are first come, first served, right? If I were to go and sort the wait list by last name, the person at the top of the list may not have been the first person on the wait list, but it just happened to be the first person in the alphabet, okay? So, you know, I gotta think about, you know, sometimes when I get information, having it come in as entered can be valuable, you know, input information to make decisions, okay? So I think that hopefully that kind of helps. Let's see, the next one here is the more command, more / question mark, okay? So the more command was created kind of like, well, you remember back in dir/p, right? dir, hey, it went right off the screen. Then we said dir/p, and then it paused. And then we press enter, and it paused again. Press enter, and eventually gave us the rest of the list, okay? Well, /p, good feature, good switch to load in dir. You learned it about it, you know, last month, whatever, fantastic, okay? But not every command has a /p. And so people start realizing when we copy things, whether it be copy or xcopy or move things, whatever, a lot of times the results fill up the screen so much and it goes off. It'd be nice to have a switch to pause the screen, just like in dir. Rather than put an a/p in every command, they said, no, that's just crazy talk, okay? We're gonna create a new command called more, okay? And then we'll join the more command with dir or other commands with the pipe symbol. The pipe symbol is the one that kind of looks like two straight lines. On my keyboard, it's right underneath the backspace key. I have a key that has backslash, and then a shift to that one is a pipe symbol. So it's kind of like a colon, but it's not a colon. They're actually lines that kind of go straight on top of each other, okay? And so I could say dir pipe more, and it says, oh, look, I filled it. Now I could go ahead and press enter, 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 enter. I could hold it down if I want, or I could do Control C to block, okay? Now what I could do is, if I were going to copy something or move something, and again, if I thought the results were going to come off the screen, okay, I would use pipe symbol more, M-O-R-E, okay? More in and of itself and stuff could also be used to look at the contents of a file. And so I could say something like more / question mark, by the way, here you go, okay? And I could say, ooh, clears the screen before displaying the page. So more /C. Okay, or start displaying after the first particular line of a file. Okay, so I can say show me more of the personnel file. Okay, or something like that. So if I said start off with more personal fill, okay, it's like, hey, that's like type personal.fill, right? Okay, and if I said more /C personal fill, what does the /C do? It clears the screen. Hey, look, it cleared the screen and gave me just that one, okay? And again, each one of these has a particular line. So Gile 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What happens if I put more / question mark, we'll look again, okay? And I put something like start displaying on the first file at line 10, okay? So come back here and I'll say more plus 10 personal fill. And it's like, oh, look, if you look up here, right, where does it start? Starts on Tran, right? Okay, Tai Chan Tran, okay, which is right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 starts on the 10th one and shows you all the way to the end, okay? All I did was say more plus 10. And again, I can combine the switches and stuff and all sorts of stuff. So things to remember about the more command. Number one, it can be used as a way to show you additional screen displays. That's the pipe symbol when you join more with another command. Or you can use more like the type command. So more and type are similar, okay? And more, you have more features on it. So it's kind of like when they came up with the idea of more, they kind of said, hey, not kind of like the X copy versus copy, but more along the lines of saying, you know, when in doubt, let's just stick it in the more command, and people could find out more and then apply that towards a command. So, you know, if I sit there and said, hey, I want to, go through the more command and I want to, you know, oh, I don't know, enable extended features, whatever, or I want a list of files to be displayed, or I want to display the next so many lines, or I want to skip the next line, or whatever. Show line numbers. That's a good one, huh? I want to actually show the line numbers. This way I know what line is which one. I don't have to count them manually because I can just look at the line numbers. Anyway, so what happened? Microsoft just started sticking more options into the more command, and that's kind of how it came to be, okay? So what do we have here in chapter 9 as we look this over, okay? We look at the purpose of this chapter is to do what? Pipes, filters, redirections, okay? I started off by saying pipes. Well, actually, I started off with filters is what I did because I said sort, find. Those are your filters, whatever. Then I introduced the pipe command with the more, okay? Then I introduced what? Okay, I talked about redirection, 1 arrow versus 2 arrows, right? The create a file versus append a file, okay? And then finished it up with talking about the more command and how more can be used as a type command, TYPE, okay? But can also be used for a whole lot more. Sorry for the pun, okay? So chapter 9, pretty good chapter, some good layouts and stuff do we start working with. So hope that kind of helps. Let me stop sharing my screen and end the recording. And you guys have it.